The evening rush at Bellini's was always the same. Elegant couples in designer clothes, business people closing deals over expensive wine, and the occasional celebrity hidden away in the corner booth. And through it all, May moved like a ghost, balancing plates of food that cost more than she made in a day. "Table 7 needs more water," called out the head waiter without looking at her. May nodded and filled a crystal pitcher. She'd been working at this upscale Chicago restaurant for 3 years now, and most customers barely looked at her face. She was just the woman who brought their food and took away their empty plates. Sometimes she wondered if they'd notice if she disappeared mid-shift. "How is everything tonight?" she asked a couple celebrating what looked like an anniversary. The man glanced up briefly. "Fine," he said, already turning back to his wife. This was her life now. Invisible. Anonymous. A far cry from what she'd once dreamed. May tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear and continued her rounds. 8 more tables to check, then help with desserts and finally clean up. If she was lucky, she'd be out by 11:30. "Did you hear? Carlotta Rivera is here tonight," whispered Trey, another server, as they passed in the narrow hallway between the dining room and kitchen. "The music critic?" May asked, her heart skipping a beat. "Yeah, and she brought that producer friend of hers, the one who discovered that jazz pianist last year." May peeked through the kitchen doors. There they were at table 12. Carlotta Rivera, whose reviews could make or break musicians' careers, and beside her, the renowned producer James Wilson. May had read every one of Carlotta's reviews, sometimes twice. "You know who they are?" Trey looked surprised. May shrugged. "I read stuff." What she didn't say was how she'd once dreamed of being reviewed by Carlotta. How she'd imagined seeing her name in the Chicago Tribune's arts section. How she'd pictured herself sitting at a gleaming grand piano instead of carrying plates of overpriced pasta. "Table 4 needs their check," the manager called out, snapping May back to reality. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of requests, orders, and the constant movement that left her feet aching. By the time the last customers paid their bills, it was nearly midnight. May's shoulders slumped with exhaustion as she counted her tips. "Not bad tonight," said Trey, peering over her shoulder. "Rent money," May replied with a tired smile, "plus a little extra." After changing out of her uniform in the cramped employee bathroom, May pulled on her worn coat and stepped into the cold Chicago night. Most of her co-workers headed for nearby bars to unwind or straight home to sleep. But May had a different destination. She walked briskly through downtown streets that gradually grew less polished. After 15 minutes, she reached a converted warehouse building. The security guard nodded at her. They'd long ago settled into a routine that didn't require words. May took the freight elevator to the 5th floor. The hallway was silent at this hour. She unlocked a heavy metal door and stepped inside the small practice room she rented by the hour. Most days she could only afford 1 hour, sometimes 2. The room contained little: a folding chair, a small table, and most importantly, an old upright piano that had seen better days. But to May, this piano was everything. She set down her bag and took out a worn leather notebook filled with handwritten music. Then she opened the piano, running her fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them. Just feeling their familiar shape brought a sense of peace after the chaos of her shift. May sat down, closed her eyes, and began to play. The notes came softly at first, a gentle melody that spoke of quiet mornings and hope. Then the piece grew more complex, her left hand adding depth while her right danced across the higher keys. This was her latest composition, a piece she'd been working on for months. In this room, with this piano, May wasn't invisible. Here her hands spoke a language more eloquent than words. Here she was whole. Music had always been part of her life. Her grandmother had taught her to play on an old keyboard when she was just 4 years old. By 8, she was composing simple pieces. By 16, she had earned a prestigious scholarship to study piano performance and composition at Northwestern University. And then life happened. Her mother's illness came suddenly, a stroke that left her unable to work. The medical bills piled up. May deferred her scholarship for a year to help, then another year taking whatever jobs would pay the bills. Waitressing paid better than most, especially at places like Bellini's, where the tips could be generous if you were quick and unobtrusive. 1 year turned into 3. Her mother eventually recovered enough to return to work part-time, but by then May's scholarship had expired. The dream of finishing her degree seemed to slip further away with each passing month. Still, she played. Still, she composed. Even when she could only afford 30 minutes in this practice room, she came. Even when her fingers were stiff from carrying trays, she played. The music refused to leave her, so she made room for it in the margins of her life. Tonight, her fingers moved with special purpose. Hearing that Carlotta Rivera was at the restaurant had stirred something in her. Not hope exactly. May had learned to be careful with hope, but perhaps a reminder of what once seemed possible. The piece she was working on blended classical structure with modern influences, hints of jazz, touches of traditional Chinese melodies her grandmother had taught her, all woven into something uniquely her own. She called it Invisible, though she'd never told anyone that name. It was her story in music, the quiet persistence of dreams that refuse to die, even when no one is watching. A wrong note jarred her concentration. May frowned and played the passage again, then again, working to smooth the transition between themes. Time disappeared as she lost herself in the music, adding notes to her composition, erasing others, playing sections repeatedly until they flowed exactly as she heard them in her mind. The buzz of her phone alarm startled her back to reality. Her hour was up. She'd need to catch the last bus if she wanted to make it home without spending money on a rideshare. May carefully placed her notebook back in her bag. Her fingers lingered on the piano keys for a moment longer before she closed the lid. Tomorrow night she would continue. The piece wasn't finished, but it was growing, evolving, becoming more itself with each session. Outside, the temperature had dropped further. May pulled her coat tighter and hurried toward the bus stop, her mind still half filled with music. The restaurant would be closed tomorrow, her one day off this week, which meant she could afford 3 hours in the practice room if she was careful with her money. The nearly empty bus rumbled through nighttime streets. May rested her head against the window, watching the city lights blur together. In her mind, she replayed the sections she'd worked on tonight, imagining how they would sound on a real concert, grand piano instead of her rented upright with its slightly uneven action in the E-flat, key that occasionally stuck. When she finally reached her apartment building, the clock on her phone showed 1:43 a.m. She climbed the 3 flights of stairs quietly, trying not to wake her neighbors. Her apartment was small, just 1 room plus a bathroom and kitchenette, but it was hers, and the rent was manageable. May set her alarm for 9 a.m. She'd promised to call her mother in the morning, and then she had grocery shopping to do before heading to the practice room. As she prepared for bed, her hand still moved occasionally, fingers playing invisible keys in the air as she refined passages of music in her mind. Tomorrow would be another day of the same routine, working on her music alone in a rented room that few knew existed. Then back to Bellini's the day after, invisible again as she served people who never really saw her. But as she drifted towards sleep, it wasn't the restaurant that filled her thoughts or the ache in her feet, or the endless cycle of work that barely covered her expenses. It was the music. Always the music. The piece she was creating note by note, the story she was telling without words. Someday, she thought as sleep finally claimed her. Someday someone will hear it. Little did she know how soon that someday would come, or how completely it would change everything. May spent her day off lost in music, her fingers dancing across the piano keys for 3 luxurious hours in the practice room. These moments alone with the piano were what kept her going through long shifts and aching feet. When she finally left, the sun was setting, painting the Chicago skyline in shades of gold and pink. The next morning arrived too soon. May dragged herself out of bed, made a quick breakfast, and headed to Bellini's for the lunch shift. The restaurant was quieter during the day, mostly business people having meetings over expensive salads and tourists who'd saved up for a fancy meal. "Staff meeting before we open," announced Victor, the manager, as May tied her apron. The servers gathered in the dining room, still empty of customers. Victor cleared his throat importantly. "We have a major event tonight," he said, pacing in front of them. "The Chicago Symphony Orchestra's annual fundraising dinner will be held here." A murmur ran through the staff. These were big spenders, wealthy patrons of the arts who thought nothing of dropping thousands on a single evening. "Everyone needs to be perfect tonight," Victor continued. "These are the people who keep culture alive in this city, and they expect the best." May felt a flutter of excitement. The Chicago Symphony Orchestra had been her dream once. As a teenager, she'd attended their performances whenever she could afford the cheapest seats in the highest balcony. "What time do they arrive?" Someone asked. 7:30. "We'll close to regular customers at 5 to prepare." Victor checked his notes. "They've requested our usual pianist, Angelo, to play during cocktails and after dinner." Angelo was a silver-haired Italian man who played pleasant, forgettable background music, nothing that would distract from conversation. Perfect for a restaurant that wanted ambiance but not attention. The lunch shift passed quickly, and May stayed to help set up for the evening, folding napkins into elaborate shapes and polishing already clean silverware until it gleamed. At 6, she slipped away to the employee bathroom to freshen up, applying a touch of makeup and pinning her hair more neatly. She returned to find Victor on his phone, his face growing increasingly concerned. "What do you mean you can't make it?" he was saying. "The guest will be here in 90 minutes. When he hung up, he looked around wildly at the staff. "Angelo is sick, some kind of food poisoning. He can't get out of bed, let alone play piano." The other servers exchanged glances. This was the kind of small disaster that could ruin an important night. "Can't we just play recorded music?" Trey suggested. Victor shook his head. They specifically requested live piano music. "These people donate millions to the arts. They'll notice the difference." He ran a hand through his hair. "I need to call an agency, see if they can send someone last minute." May stood frozen, her heart suddenly pounding. This was crazy. She couldn't possibly. And yet, "I can play," she said so quietly that no one heard her. Victor was already dialing his phone. May took a deep breath and spoke louder. "Victor, I can play the piano." Everyone turned to look at her. "You?" Victor's eyebrows shot up. "What do you mean you can play? Like chopsticks or heart and soul?" May flinched at his dismissive tone but held her ground. "I studied piano performance at Northwestern. I can sight read anything Angelo would play." Victor stared at her as if she'd grown a second head. "Why didn't you ever mention this?" She shrugged. "You never asked." Trey stepped forward. "I've heard her humming complex stuff while she works. Classical pieces. She knows music." Victor looked skeptical but desperate. "These are important people, May. The director of the symphony will be here along with their major donors. If you embarrass us, I won't," she said with more confidence than she felt. After a long pause, Victor sighed. "Fine. Show me what you can do." He led her to the baby grand piano in the corner of the dining room, a beautiful instrument that was more for show than anything else. Angelo usually played an electric keyboard tucked discreetly behind a partition. May sat down, adjusting the bench height. Her hands hovered over the keys for just a moment before she began to play Debussy's Clair de Lune, a piece that was technically challenging, but familiar enough to most listeners to sound pleasant and impressive. The restaurant fell silent as she played, her body swaying slightly with the music. This piano was far superior to the old upright she practiced on, its action smooth and responsive, its tone rich and full. May closed her eyes, letting herself sink into the piece. When she finished, she looked up to find the entire staff watching her, mouths slightly open. "Where have you been hiding this?" Victor asked, his voice hushed. "In plain sight," May answered simply. After a moment, Victor nodded. "Okay, you'll play during cocktail hour, nothing too showy, just background stuff. Angelo keeps his sheet music in that cabinet. During dinner, you'll serve as planned. After dinner, you can play again while they have drinks." May nodded, relief and excitement battling in her chest. "And May," Victor added, "wear your hair down. You look more artistic that way." At 7:30 precisely, the guests began to arrive. Men in expensive suits, women in cocktail dresses and glittering jewelry. May sat at the piano, wearing her server's uniform but with her hair loose around her shoulders as instructed. She played what was expected, light classical pieces that provided a pleasant backdrop to conversation. From her position, she could see everyone who entered. She recognized the symphony director immediately, a tall woman with short gray hair whose picture often appeared in the art section of the newspaper. Then came several well-known philanthropists, a few local politicians, and finally May nearly missed a note, Carlotta Rivera, the critic who had been in the restaurant just days before. May forced herself to focus on the music, not on the critic who could change careers with a few typed words. She played a selection of Chopin and Satie, pieces that were beautiful but not demanding of attention. As the room filled with Chicago's elite, May remained in the background exactly as Angelo would have been. At 8:15, Victor caught her eye and nodded. Time to switch roles. May finished her piece and slipped away from the piano, heading to the kitchen to begin serving. For the next hour and a half, she was just a waitress again, moving efficiently between tables with plates of exquisitely prepared food. No one who had seen her at the piano seemed to connect her with the server refilling their water glasses. Who was playing earlier? She overheard one guest ask Victor as she cleared a plate. That was Angelo Romano, our regular pianist. Victor lied smoothly. He'll return after dinner. May said nothing, just continued her work. Part of her wanted to correct him, to claim her talent, but a larger part was relieved to remain anonymous. Playing background music was one thing. Being noticed was another entirely. After the dessert course, as guests lingered over coffee and liqueurs, Victor approached her in the kitchen. Time to play again, he said. Same as before, nothing too attention-grabbing. May nodded and returned to the piano. She began with the same style of unobtrusive music, watching as the conversations continued undisturbed. But as the evening wore on, she found herself growing restless. These people, these supporters of the arts, weren't even listening. Almost without conscious decision, her hands shifted. Instead of another Chopin prelude, she began to play one of her own compositions. It started simply enough, not drawing immediate attention. But as the piece progressed, it grew more complex, more passionate. This was the music she wrote late at night, alone in her rented practice room. Music that spoke of dreams deferred but not abandoned, of beauty found in unexpected places. It was her story, told without words. May was so lost in the music that she didn't immediately notice the change in the room. The steady hum of conversation had dimmed. People were turning to look at the piano, their discussions interrupted by the unexpected shift in atmosphere. She should stop, she knew. Go back to being musical wallpaper, but the music wanted to be played, needed to be heard. Just this once, she would play what was truly in her heart. The piece built to its climax, her fingers flying across the keys with a technical skill that would have impressed her professors. When it finally ended with a delicate, questioning phrase that seemed to hang in the air, May was breathing hard, her heart pounding. For one terrible moment, there was complete silence. Then applause broke out, scattered at first, then building. May looked up, startled to find most of the room watching her. The symphony director was leaning forward in her chair, and Carlotta Rivera was making her way directly toward the piano. May's stomach dropped. She'd gone too far, broken the unspoken rule that background musicians should remain in the background. Victor would be furious. Carlotta stopped beside the piano, her expression unreadable. What was that piece? She asked. I don't recognize it. May swallowed hard. It's something I wrote. Carlotta's eyebrows rose. You wrote that? What's your name? Machen, she answered, suddenly very aware that she was still in her server's uniform. Are you published? Recorded? May shook her head. No, I just write for myself. Victor appeared beside them, his smile tight. I apologize if our pianist disturbed your conversation, Ms. Rivera. Disturbed? Carlotta looked at him sharply. Quite the opposite. I was having a terribly dull discussion about tax benefits of arts donations when I heard something genuinely interesting. She turned back to May. Do you have more pieces like this? Before May could answer, the symphony director joined them. That was quite remarkable, she said, studying May with interest, particularly the way you incorporated traditional Eastern motifs into a distinctly contemporary classical framework. May felt as if she were dreaming. Thank you. Victor was looking back and forth between them, confusion evident on his face. Your pianist is exceptionally talented, the director told him. Yes, Victor agreed quickly. May is one of our most valued pianists. Play something else, Carlotta requested. Another original piece. May looked at Victor, who gave a small, bewildered nod. She turned back to the piano and began to play again, another of her compositions, this one even more complex than the first. As she played, she was aware of a growing crowd around the piano, but she kept her focus on the music. When she finished, there was immediate applause. You studied at Northwestern? The symphony director asked. For a time, May answered carefully. I had to leave before completing my degree. Carlotta was making notes in her phone. I want to hear more of your work. In a proper venue. She handed May a business card. Call my office tomorrow. As they walked away, May sat stunned, the business card clutched in her hand. Other guests approached, asking about her music, her background, her influences across the room. Victor was watching with an expression that mixed shock, calculation, and something that might have been respect. May answered the questions as best she could, still feeling as if she might wake up at any moment. But the card in her hand was real. The admiration in the eyes of people who, hours earlier, hadn't even seen her, that was real too. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel something dangerous, hope. May barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of the symphony director and Carlotta Rivera, looking at her with interest instead of looking through her. She kept checking her purse to make sure Carlotta's business card was still there, proof that the evening had actually happened. Morning came with a mixture of excitement and fear. May made herself a cup of strong tea and stared at the business card on her kitchen table. The embossed letters seemed to shimmer in the early light. Carlotta Rivera, music critic. Just call, she told herself, picking up her phone. She put it down again. What would she say? That she was a waitress who composed music in rented practice rooms? That she'd abandoned her education to pay medical bills? That she had no connections, no recordings, nothing but the music in her head? Her phone buzzed with a text from Victor. Need to talk before your shift today. Come in at 2. May's stomach tightened. Was he angry about last night? She'd gone against his instructions to remain in the background. Maybe he was going to fire her. After changing her outfit 3 times, May finally headed to Bellini's, arriving precisely at 2. The restaurant was quiet, with only a few tables occupied by late lunchers. Victor was in his office, looking unusually serious. Sit down, May. She perched on the edge of a chair, hands clasped in her lap. Last night, he began, you directly disobeyed my instructions. May took a deep breath. I know, I'm sorry. I got carried away. He held up a hand to stop her. Let me finish. You disobeyed me, and in doing so, you impressed some of the most influential people in Chicago's music scene. A small smile appeared on his face. The symphony director called me this morning to ask about you. She did? May couldn't hide her surprise. Apparently, you made quite an impression. She wanted to know if you're under contract with us. Contract? I'm just a server. That's what I told her. Victor leaned forward. But I also told her that your talents are wasted clearing tables, and that Bellini's would be happy to see you pursue other opportunities. May blinked, trying to process his words. You're not firing me? Firing you? Victor laughed. No, but I am promoting you if you want it. Angelo is getting older and his repertoire is limited. I'd like you to take over as our regular pianist 3 nights a week. But what about serving? You'd still do lunch shifts, but evenings would be at the piano. He named a salary that made May's eyes widen. Plus, you'd keep your tips from lunch. It was more money than she'd ever made, and she'd be playing instead of carrying plates. There's one more thing, Victor added, sliding a business card across the desk. The symphony director suggested you call this man. He's looking for composers for a new music initiative. May took the card, her hand trembling slightly. Why are you doing this? Victor shrugged. Last night, Bellini's was the talk of the arts community because of you. That kind of publicity is priceless. He paused, and maybe I feel a little bad for not noticing what was right in front of me for 3 years. After her meeting with Victor, May sat in a coffee shop, staring at the 2 business cards in front of her. Her phone felt heavy in her hand as she dialed Carlotta's number. Rivera, answered a brisk voice. Hi, this is May Chen, from Bellini's last night. You asked me to call the waitress pianist. Yes, I've been waiting for your call. Carlotta's tone warmed. Your composition was the most interesting thing I've heard in months. Thank you, May managed, unsure what else to say. I want to hear more. Are you free tomorrow afternoon? There's a performance space on Michigan Avenue where a friend of mine is hosting a small gathering of new composers. I'd like you to play. May's heart raced. Just like that? You don't need recordings or recommendations or... I heard you play, Carlotta cut in. That's all the recommendation I need. Besides, I've been in this business for 30 years. I know talent when I hear it. They arranged the details and May hung up feeling dazed. Then she called the number the symphony director had provided. The conversation was shorter but equally surreal. A commission for a short piece to be performed as part of a showcase of emerging composers. By the time she arrived at Bellini's for her lunch shift, May felt as if she were walking in a dream. Everything looked the same. The polished tables, the pristine white napkins, the expensive artwork on the walls. But she was different. "You look happy," Trey commented as they folded napkins together. "Did Victor give you a raise or something?" May told him about the promotion. "From server to pianist just like that?" Trey shook his head in amazement. "I knew you could play, but I had no idea you were that good." "Neither did I," May admitted. "I mean, I knew I could play, but I never thought anyone important would listen." The next afternoon, May stood outside a sleek building on Michigan Avenue, her notebook of compositions clutched to her chest. She'd spent the morning at her practice room, refining the pieces she planned to play. Now, facing the glass doors of the performance space, she hesitated. Inside, professional musicians and composers would be waiting, people with degrees and connections and years of experience. People who belonged in that world. "You're May, aren't you?" She turned to see a woman about her age carrying a violin case. "How did you know?" The woman smiled. "Carlotta described you." "I'm Zoe, by the way. She invited me too." Something in Zoe's friendly manner calmed May's nerves. Together, they entered the building. The small gathering turned out to be about 20 people in a beautiful room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A gleaming grand piano stood on a small raised platform. Around the room, musicians were chatting in small groups, some with instruments, others with tablets or scores in hand. Carlotta spotted them immediately and came over. "May, excellent timing. We're just about to begin." She gestured toward the piano. "Would you mind going first? I've been telling everyone about you." Before May could panic, Zoe gave her an encouraging nod. "You've got this." Somehow May found herself walking to the piano, aware of curious eyes following her. As she sat down adjusting the bench, she caught snippets of whispered conversations. "Waitress at Bellini's. No formal training. Never published." She placed her notebook on the stand, opened to her favorite composition, and took a deep breath. Then she began to play. The piece started simply, a melody that evoked questions, searching. Then it built, layer upon layer, incorporating elements of her Chinese heritage, classical training, and the raw emotion of her own journey. As she played, the room disappeared. There was only the music, her music, filling the space and telling her story. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. Then applause, genuine and enthusiastic. Carlotta came forward, her eyes bright. "That was extraordinary." "What do you call this piece?" "Invisible," May answered quietly. A tall man stepped forward from the group. "There's nothing invisible about that music, Ms. Chen. It demands to be heard." May recognized him from photos, the composer in residence for the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. He continued, "Have you considered orchestration? This would be powerful with full symphonic backing." Before May could answer, others joined in with questions and comments. How long had she been composing? What were her influences? Did she have more pieces like this one? She answered as best she could, still overwhelmed by their interest. When asked about her background, she hesitated only briefly before telling the truth. About her scholarship, her mother's illness, her years as a waitress, and the practice room she rented by the hour. "That's why your music feels so authentic," someone commented. "It comes from real life, not just academic theory." By the time she left that evening, May had invitations to 3 more events, contact information from a dozen music professionals, and a request from a chamber music ensemble to adapt Invisible for their group. On the train ride home, her phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from Carlotta, a link to her latest column in the Chicago Tribune's art section. The headline made May's breath catch, "Chicago's Hidden Musical Treasure Discovered in Unlikely Place." The article praised her unique compositional style and raw talent, calling her a fresh voice in a field often dominated by tradition and predictable patterns. The final paragraph read, "In a time when the classical music world struggles to find relevance and connection with modern audiences, May Chen's work bridges worlds, Eastern and Western, traditional and contemporary, academic and accessible. That such talent has been serving pasta to unaware diners for years raises uncomfortable questions about how many Other artistic voices remain unheard due to economic necessity, rather than lack of merit. May read the article 3 times, tears blurring her vision. After years of feeling invisible, someone had not only seen her but was showing her to the world. When she finally arrived home, her phone was filled with notifications, social media mentions, emails from people who had read Carlotta's article, even a message from her former professor at Northwestern. The last text was from her mother. "I just saw the article. I always knew your music would find its audience. So proud of you, my girl." May sat at her small kitchen table, overwhelmed by the day's events. Everything was happening so fast. Just 3 days ago, she had been an anonymous waitress, playing piano in secret. Now people knew her name, wanted to hear her music, believed in her talent. She should have felt nothing but joy. But a small knot of anxiety formed in her stomach. What if this was just a momentary fascination? What if, after the novelty wore off, they realized she wasn't good enough? She had no degree, no formal portfolio, none of the credentials that most successful composers had. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Carlotta. "The symphony director wants to meet with you tomorrow about a possible commission. This is just the beginning, May. Your voice is too important to be silenced again." May took a deep breath, feeling the weight of opportunity and expectation. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with possibilities she'd stopped allowing herself to imagine years ago. But one thing was clear. Whether this led to lasting success or brief recognition, she would no longer keep her music hidden. It deserved to be heard, and she deserved to be seen. No matter what came next, she would no longer be invisible. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind for May. By day, she continued her lunch shifts at Bellini's, though customers now sometimes recognized her from Carlotta's article. By night, she played piano at the restaurant, mixing classical standards with her own compositions, watching as patrons who once ignored her now fell silent to listen. 3 evenings a week, she met with the symphony director and other musicians to discuss the commissioned piece they wanted her to write. It was to be performed at a special showcase of new voices in classical music, scheduled for 3 months away. "We want something substantial," the director had told her during their first meeting. "Something that showcases your unique perspective. Don't hold back." May had nodded, excitement mingling with terror. She'd never written for a full orchestra before. The scale of it was daunting. All those instruments, all those musicians interpreting her musical ideas. The responsibility felt enormous. One Tuesday afternoon, as May was clearing a table at Bellini's, a tall man in an expensive suit stopped her. "You're May Chen, aren't you? The composer?" She nearly dropped the plates she was carrying. "Yes. I'm Dean Fletcher from Wellington Records. I've been trying to reach you." May blinked in surprise. "Reach me? I've called the restaurant several times, left messages." He gave her a business card. "We're interested in discussing a recording contract for your work." Later, as May looked up Wellington Records online, she discovered they were one of the largest classical music labels in the country. The idea that they'd been trying to contact her, that they even knew who she was, seemed surreal. As news of her discovery spread through musical circles, more opportunities followed. A documentary filmmaker wanted to feature her in a series about unconventional paths in classical music. The chamber music ensemble that had approached her at Carlotta's gathering commissioned a piece for their upcoming tour. Her former professor from Northwestern invited her to speak to his composition students. "You've become the poster child for hidden talent," Zoe told her over coffee one afternoon. They'd become fast friends since meeting at Carlotta's event. Zoe, a violinist with a small avant-garde ensemble, understood the challenges of making a life in music. "I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that," May admitted. "Sometimes it feels like people are more interested in the story than in the music itself. Waitress to composer makes a good headline. Then prove it's about the music," Zoe said simply. "Write something so good they forget everything else when they hear it." May took this advice to heart as she worked on the symphony commission. She'd given up her rented practice room, using the piano at Bellini's during off hours instead. Victor had been surprisingly supportive, even setting up a small office in an unused storage room where she could work on orchestration. "Consider it an investment," he'd said with a wink. "Soon we'll be advertising that the famous composer May Chen got her start here." Despite the excitement surrounding her sudden rise, not everyone was supportive. One evening, As May played at Bellini's, she overheard a conversation from a nearby table. "It's all hype," a man was saying dismissively. Rivera needed a feel-good story, so she created one. A waitress with no formal training writing serious music? Please, have you actually heard her play? His companion asked. "I don't need to. Without the proper background, it's bound to be derivative at best, embarrassing at worst." May's fingers faltered briefly, before she forced herself to continue playing. The man's words stung because they echoed her own deepest fears. That she wasn't qualified. That she didn't belong in this world of trained musicians and established composers. Similar comments appeared online after a local arts blog published a profile about her. Most responses were positive, but a vocal minority questioned whether her music deserved attention or if it was merely a heartwarming human interest story. "Ignore them," Carlotta advised when May mentioned the criticisms. "Every artist faces skeptics. What matters is the work." But the doubts followed May as she composed. Late at night, hunched over pages of orchestration, she'd question every note, every phrase. Was this good enough? Was she good enough? Or was she just a curiosity who would be forgotten when the next unusual story came along? The pressure mounted as the date of the symphony showcase approached. May had completed the first two movements of her piece but struggled with the final movement. Nothing she wrote seemed right, either too predictable or too chaotic, never finding the balance she heard in her head. 6 weeks before the performance, she received an unexpected call from a music professor at Juilliard, who'd heard about her from Carlotta. "We have a special residency program for composers with unique backgrounds," he explained. "It provides time, resources, and mentorship without the constraints of a traditional academic path. I think you'd be perfect for it." The opportunity was extraordinary. A year at one of the world's most prestigious music institutions, working with renowned composers. But it would mean leaving Chicago, putting her newly established life on hold. "Think about it," the professor said. "The application deadline is next month." That night May couldn't sleep. The residency offer had brought all her contradictory feelings to the surface. Part of her was thrilled by how far she'd come in such a short time, while another part waited for it all to fall apart. The cynical comments she'd overheard played on repeat in her mind. The next morning, exhausted and distracted, she made a rare mistake during her lunch shift, spilling water on a customer. "I'm so sorry," she apologized. Mortified, the customer waved it off good-naturedly, but Victor pulled her aside afterward. "What's going on with you? You've seemed off for days." Before she could stop herself, May found herself telling him everything, her struggles with the composition, the criticism she'd encountered, the Juilliard offer, and her overwhelming fear of failing publicly. Victor listened thoughtfully. When she finished, he asked, "Why did you keep playing all those years, when no one was listening? When you had to pay to rent that practice room, when you were too tired from double shifts? Why keep going?" The question caught her off guard. Because I had to. The music was there, inside me. It needed to come out, not for recognition, not for critics, for the music itself, Victor said. "Remember that." His words stayed with her as she returned to her composition that evening. For hours she played and replayed the first two movements, trying to find the thread that would lead to the third. What was this piece really about? What was she trying to say? The answer came to her around midnight. This wasn't just her story as a hidden musician found. It was about everyone who created in obscurity, everyone whose voice went unheard. The final movement needed to speak for them too. With renewed clarity, May began to write again. The third movement took shape, a complex interweaving of themes that began tentatively, like hidden voices finding courage, before building to a powerful statement that could no longer be ignored. When she finally completed the full orchestration 2 weeks later, she named the piece Emergence. The day before the symphony showcase, May received an email that made her stomach drop. A prominent classical music blog had published an article questioning her rapid rise. While Ms. Chen's story makes for compelling human interest, tomorrow's performance will determine whether she's truly a compositional talent or merely benefiting from a cultural moment that prioritizes unusual backstories over musical substance. The article went on to note her lack of formal credentials and suggest that the symphony was using her for publicity rather than artistic merit. May's phone rang almost immediately after the article was published. It was Carlotta. "Have you seen it?" Carlotta asked without preamble. Yes, May replied quietly. Good. Now ignore it. Tomorrow isn't about proving anything to critics. It's about sharing your music with people who want to hear it. What if they're right? May's voice wavered. What if I'm not ready for this? Do you remember what you told me when I asked why you called your first piece invisible? May thought back to their conversation. I said it was about being unseen but still existing, still having value. Exactly. Your worth as a composer doesn't depend on anyone's recognition. You were writing beautiful music when no one was listening, and that music was just as valuable then as it is now. After they hung up, May walked to the window of her apartment, looking out at the Chicago skyline. The city that had ignored her for years was now paying attention. Tomorrow, a full orchestra would perform her composition for the first time. Some would come hoping to witness a fairy tale success. Others would come ready to confirm their skepticism. But neither mattered as much as the music itself, the notes she'd written in the quiet hours, the melodies that had kept her company when no one else did. Win or lose, praise or criticism, she had given voice to something true, and no one could take that away. The morning of the showcase, May woke early, a strange calm having replaced her anxiety. She dressed carefully in a simple black dress she'd bought for the occasion, her first new dress in years. As she was about to leave her apartment, her phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. Ready to make history? May smiled and texted back, ready to make music. The rest is up to them. At the symphony hall, she was escorted to a small room where she could prepare before the performance. Through the walls, she could hear the orchestra warming up, dozens of instruments that would soon bring her composition to life. A stagehand knocked on her door. 5 minutes, Miss Chen. May took a deep breath and stood. Whatever happened next, she would face it with the same quiet determination that had sustained her all these years. It was time to be heard. The symphony hall buzzed with anticipation. Every seat was filled, from the expensive boxes to the highest balcony. May peeked through the curtain at the side of the stage, her heart pounding at the sight of so many people. The symphony director approached, elegant in her formal black attire. Nervous? Terrified, May admitted. The director smiled. Good. The day you stop feeling nervous before a performance is the day you should quit music. She squeezed May's arm gently. Your piece is programmed last, the position of honor. The audience will hear 2 established composers first, then yours as the finale. May nodded, though this knowledge only increased her anxiety. Her composition would be directly compared to works by experienced, respected composers. As she waited, May spotted familiar faces in the audience. Victor sat in the 10th row, looking uncomfortable but proud in a suit she'd never seen him wear before. Nearby was Trey, who had switched shifts to attend. Her mother was there too, having taken the bus from Michigan for the occasion, and scattered throughout the hall were the critics, Carlotta in her usual spot near the front, but also reviewers from major music publications, bloggers, influencers in the classical world. They'd all come to witness the debut of the Waitress composer, to decide whether she was a genuine talent or just a fleeting curiosity. The lights dimmed, and the audience fell silent as the conductor took the stage. The first 2 pieces were received warmly, polite applause, appreciative murmurs. May listened intently from backstage, analyzing the orchestration, the audience's reaction, anything to distract herself from what was coming. During the second intermission, the symphony director found her again. It's customary for the composer to join the conductor on stage after the performance. When your piece concludes, come out and take a bow. May's mouth went dry. She hadn't expected to face the audience directly. What if they hate it? She whispered. Then you'll bow gracefully anyway, the director replied. But they won't hate it. The lights dimmed once more. The conductor appeared, this time introducing May's composition with a few words about new voices in classical music. Then he raised his baton, and the orchestra began to play the opening notes of Emergence. May closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. It was strange hearing her composition brought to life by a full orchestra, both familiar and new, like meeting a friend in unexpected finery. The first movement unfolded exactly as she'd imagined it, the string section capturing the haunting quality she'd sought, the woodwinds adding color and texture. Time seemed to stretch and compress as she listened. Moments she'd labored over for days passed in seconds. Brief transitions she'd written quickly expanded into spacious musical landscapes. Through it all, May found herself holding her breath, caught between pride in what she'd created and fear of what would come next. The second movement began, more rhythmic, more assertive than the first. This was the music of struggle, of perseverance, of working long hours and still finding energy to create. The percussion section drove the piece forward, while the brass instruments added moments of triumph. May could feel the audience's engagement shift, the polite attention deepening into something more active. Then came the third movement, the one she'd struggled with most, the one that had finally come together in that midnight revelation. It started with a single violin, playing a delicate melody that seemed to ask a question. Gradually, other instruments joined in, first one at a time, then in small groups, each adding their voice to the conversation. The melody passed through the orchestra, transforming as it went, gaining strength and conviction. The final section built toward a climax that brought together all the themes from the earlier movements, the hidden beauty from the first, the determined energy of the second, and the emerging voices of the third, all combined into a powerful statement that filled the hall with sound. As the last note faded, there was a moment of complete silence. May's heart sank. They hated it. It was too amateur, too personal, too. The applause began, scattered at first, then building rapidly into thunderous approval. She could hear cheers mixed with the clapping, see people rising to their feet in different parts of the hall. The conductor turned toward the side of the stage, gesturing for her to join him. May's legs felt wooden as she walked out into the bright lights. The applause intensified when she appeared, the standing ovation spreading until nearly everyone was on their feet. The conductor shook her hand, then stepped back, leaving her alone at the center of the stage. May looked out at the sea of faces, strangers and friends, critics and supporters, all united in this moment of appreciation for something she'd created. She bowed deeply, emotion welling up inside her. When she straightened, she caught her mother's eye in the audience. The woman who had raised her alone, who had sacrificed so much, was weeping openly, her hands pressed together as if in prayer. After 3 curtain calls, May was finally allowed to leave the stage. She was immediately surrounded by well-wishers, orchestra members, music faculty from local universities, patrons of the arts. Their words blurred together in a haze of congratulations and praise. Extraordinary. Orchestration for someone self-taught. Such emotional authenticity. The counterpoint in the third movement was masterful. Eventually, the symphony director ushered her to a small reception in an adjoining room where champagne was being served. May was still in a daze when Carlotta approached, champagne flute in hand. "Well," Carlotta said, eyes twinkling, "I believe that answers the question of whether you're a genuine talent." Before May could respond, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses joined them. She recognized him immediately, Lawrence Whitfield, the critic whose article had questioned her abilities just yesterday. "Ms. Chen," he said stiffly, "I owe you an apology." May blinked in surprise. "I made assumptions based on your background rather than waiting to hear your music," he continued. "Your composition tonight was revelatory. I was wrong, and I will say so in my review." As he walked away, Carlotta chuckled. "Lawrence never admits he's wrong. Consider yourself part of a very select group." The reception continued for hours. May was introduced to so many people that their names and faces became a blur. What stood out were the conversations, serious, detailed discussions about her composition techniques, her influences, her future plans. No one mentioned her waitressing past. They spoke to her as a composer, nothing less. Around midnight, as the crowd finally began to thin, May found a quiet corner to catch her breath. She was exhausted but filled with a deep sense of satisfaction, unlike anything she'd ever known. Victor found her there, looking pleased but slightly out of place among the musical elite. "Not bad for a server," he joked. May smiled. "Thanks for coming. And for everything else. I just gave you a chance to play at the restaurant. You did all the rest. Still, I won't forget it." Victor's expression grew serious. "You won't be coming back to Bellini's, will you?" May hesitated. The question had been in the back of her mind all evening. After this triumph, could she really return to clearing tables and taking orders? "I don't think so," she admitted. "There's the Juilliard residency. and Wellington Records wants to discuss a recording contract, and the symphony director mentioned a possible position as composer in residence. Good, Victor said firmly. You belong here, not serving pasta to people who don't look up from their phones. As they spoke, May's mother approached, her eyes still shining with tears of pride. My daughter, she said, embracing May tightly. You were always playing music and